even, if anything, it's even, I mean, it's very, full isn't the word for it, because it's the body of this one is so thick when you try it. It isn't oily, but it's a very, has a great deal of weight.
Yeah.
And honey, and just pure honey, not qualities. Now, I can see where if I was going to serve this one and wanted to serve it, you know, when it comes out, whenever that is, well, I'd really want it open to be open 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah, which is, you know, usually more surprising, I think, for people to hear for a white wine versus a red. But in this case, I agree. This is one of those wines that has benefited from being open now for a couple hours. And it's actually pretty nice. It's got a really nice, everything is showing really nice balance, even at this temperature, which is probably even a dash warmer than most people would probably be drinking their whites at.
It's a, you know, it's a bit of a wine like you'd want with, I could be even having a fairly, you know, serving this as a first course if you had some kind of a, even like a fairly creamy dish, even like fettuccine or something with cream and butter.
Yeah.
It will hold up to it.
Oh.
I mean, and it would be really good with something like that. The acid doesn't get in the way, and yet it's present. It's, if anything, a little bit more melded into the wine, I think, when we first opened it. Quite a bit different.
Yeah, this is
you know, this gives me a much clearer idea of what this wine is going to be like in a while.
Yeah, this one definitely has the chance to age. So I guess now we have probably a majority view of this event in here as of now. This is our second showing today of this. We had a start off virtual open house at 1 p.m. with a good little crowd. I went through all these wines. Kind of what I let everyone know is just kind of open format. So if you want to chime in either by talking or texting something through the chat, like I said, we're more than happy to chat on anything involving the wines or non-wine related at this point. We definitely had some more interesting conversations, I think, about just the wine world in general and things, our thoughts on marketing and sales and all that too. So like I said, it doesn't have to be necessarily related just to the wines we're drinking. We'll kind of just go through each of the wines one by one. I have a couple different sets. So we'll start off with the whites. We'll probably show the Merlot after this, and then we'll kind of go side by side, each of the single vineyard blends. So we'll start with 2 blondes and end with Syrah. As you probably heard from when we started, we have both of the Semillon, I believe, at least in our glasses right now, and here a lot of honey notes on this wine, even more so than the 2018, which it was more of a honeysuckle. It was more of a floral kind of honey. This is, you're like kind of a honeycomb. I mean, this is much more rich in that honey note flavor. Little less citrus in this than last year. Like I said, it's got a richness to the nose, but it's still got a very, like I said, balanced kind of weight to it. And like I said, it's actually gotten more interesting as it's been open now for a couple hours. Any other thoughts on the Semillon?
No, I just think it, you know, there's a lot of food that I could use it with that might be difficult to pair up with some kind of white wine, wines that I don't normally like. I don't usually want to, you know, if I've got some salad dish or something with seafood in it that's got some kind of a creamy kind of a base to it, it's a little bit hard. I tend to want to go Gewürztraminer or something like that, but this wine would be even better. It has a great deal of oomph to it. Enhances what you'd be, in my imagination, what you'd be eating, and yet maintains its qualities as a wine. It's really, really very handy that way. It's not a wine that most people have around, but it's, when you're trying to serve food and match up wine with it, this is something I think that you want to use in your cellar or have in your cellar, because it just works really well in my brain with a lot of foods that come to mind. And the next one's the Sauv Blanc, which is 25% Semillon.
So for those of you who aren't super familiar with our whites, and I might have been collecting our red wines for some time, we actually planted fruit at Two Blondes Vineyard. So we have probably about a little over an acre there as of now.
2 acres.
Almost 2 acres of both Semillon and Sauv Blanc. The idea was, my dad, Chris, has been making white wines actually since he almost started making wine. It's just never been a very big part of the overall portfolio of the wines he made. Even since I came on in 2013, we made Gewürztraminer, we've made Viognier, we've also started making Chardonnay now, but kind of keeping in the same vein of the red Bordeaux varietals that we use, we figure we go Sauv Blanc and Semillon. And the Two Blondes site seemed like a really great site that we could experiment and try it. So this fruit is now, it was planted, we figured around 2015. So young vines, but already showing a lot of expressiveness for the type of varietals that they are. There's definitely a lot of typicity, which it's great to see early on because it should only get more pronounced as the vines age.
I think the Semillon definitely is weighing heavy on this Sauv Blanc. It's pushing it around a little bit, but overall, after this wine's been open 3 hours, which is something I'd recommend with the wine this young and been bottled that long. It's really starting to have a very nice sort of middle palate to it, and I like the finish. The nose is starting to develop on the wine, but it has quite a bit of weight to it. While on the other punk sort of qualities to the wine, more fruit sort of qualities, but it's a lot different from the 2018. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem as fruit driven to me. It's a little bit more, like say with the honey, with the Semillon, and in this one, there's the acidity is good in it, and the fruit is, I think, still kind of on the way in some aspects from the Sauv Blanc. The Semillon it's coming through pretty well in the blend.
Yeah,
and it's a real balanced kind of wine. I'm kind of searching for things in it. So we'll see how it goes. But, when you get really well-balanced wine, sometimes it's all kind of waiting to be something. And I kind of sense that in this wine, as well as seeing how it's changed over the last few hours. I'd like to see it in bottle. I'd like to see it in 2 or 3 months.
Yeah. So I kind of touched on one reason why we decided to go with Sauv Blanc and Semillon, but what are your just general thoughts on white wines in Washington State in general, and any other potential?
Well, I don't. When you have a winery like San Michel and they're making 8 million cases and half of it Chardonnay, it isn't because Chardonnay grows so well in the States, because Chardonnay is the market in the world. That being said, I don't really care for Chardonnay in this state. I'm not a big fan either of California Chardonnay, but I like it quite a bit better than I do Washington Chardonnay. I think we grow Semillon very well. I like the Sauv Blanc in this state. And I used to make Chenin Blanc and made some wines that, from the mid-90s. And I tried one this year, a couple of different bottles. One bottle is better than the other, but they were both pretty darn good, considering how old the wines were. So that's kind of my take on Washington whites. I'm also not a giant Viognier fan. I don't care where it's from. It's just a wine that I've just never been able to get hold of. Those are the major wines, I think, that are grown in the state. Riesling, I think you can grow in the state really well. I've had some San Michel Rieslings for $12 I thought were really nice wines. So it's something that people don't want to make. Riesling, believe it or not, was, I think, the most expensive grape in the state in 1979. It was $900 a ton. Well, here we are, 40 years later, and you can probably buy it for $100 a ton. So maybe it wasn't the best investment for all you guys out there that invested in that. But you can make really, really nice wine from it. In fact, we thought about planting Riesling at Two Blondes, but we went with something that was more in line with what we're trying to do with the Merlot Cabernet and Cab Franc, at least in the world. And that's the two varieties that they use in Bordeaux. Whether they work here or not, I don't know. But they both grow well in Washington, so at least we'd have that. Whether they compare to anything else outside of the state, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
How much are these wines?
I think on our website they're both $28.
$28?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they seem like good $28 wines.
Yeah, I mean, the white's a relatively new. This Sauv Blanc Semillon's a new addition to our just overall wine portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the wine making goes, because I kind of forgot to touch on that, you know, the Semillon, we only make a handful of barrels. Most of it's in stainless steel. In the case of this 100% Semillon we did, it's all stainless steel, fermented and aged. In the Sauv Blanc, it's a mix of both oak and stainless steel barrels. And I believe in this vintage, because it was new barrels in 18, they're 1-year-old barrels. So there's going to be a little tiny bit of new oak, but it's really not going to be something that's ever going to be too noticeable on wines from this vintage. We have some new barrels this year, so you'll probably see a little bit of new oak on the Sauv Blanc going forward. Yeah, you know, small production for us. You know, one part of it for me, doing decent amount of wine dinners both here and around the country. It's definitely nice having some white wine, so you don't have to make a chef essentially craft a 6-course meal from all red wines. And like I said, it's fun. It's a different, making white wine has definitely got a different feel to it than red wine sometimes. And it's definitely been interesting to see how these vines and both the wines have changed even in the couple of years we've started making it. We mentioned that Chardonnay is maybe our favorite. That being said, our own Chardonnay we make is actually excellent. So regardless of what we might have said earlier, it doesn't apply to ours, obviously. No, it's just a grape that unfortunately, because it's so popular, there's just such a wide variety of them, and a lot of them unfortunately designed in a style that I don't know is too popular anymore with most people that I personally drink with, but it is still very popular with the masses. And because of that, you see a lot of this mediocre to poor example of Chardonnay. But yeah, no, it's like I said, the white program is fun, and like I said, we hope to keep doing it and trying different varietals. We're going to keep moving. So we're going to start in red. So that was the two whites from our tasting today. So we're going to start with just a single red right now. So this is, lazy out there, the 2018 Shampoo Merlot. It's the only new release from the, essentially what we like to call the Black Label line of wines. The rest of the ones we will probably be releasing early in 2021. We don't make a ton of Merlot, so we actually sold out the 17 already a few months ago. And people have been already asking about getting more Andrew Will Merlot, so we figure we might as well get it out to the people. You know, Merlot is, for both of us, one of our favorite grapes, and probably one of the, I think, best grown grapes here in Washington. And being able to make one 100% from Shampoo Vineyard is a really fun exercise in getting to know both the vineyard and the grape. I'll let you take over on some of your thoughts just on Merlot in general.
You know, when I worked in restaurants, we didn't have a ton of Merlots. We had Duckhorn at first, and then we had Leonetti. I always liked the Leonetti Merlot. I liked it as well as anything that he made back then. And moving into the few French wines that we had, I liked Pomerol and some Saint Emilions, and they were cheaper. They were drinking better earlier on. And they're very satisfying wines for the money. So they're wines that I was very comfortable with, and wines that I started to like more and more. When I buy wines now from Bordeaux, it's probably going to be wines from the right bank. There's three that I like the most is Bouchateau Certain, Le Bon Gilles, and Le Glis Clanet. It's nice to have some other wines, from the left bank for maybe say Némillon for variety, but I'd be satisfied just with those wines right there and what they represent. So when you come in there, they're all about Merlot. So when you come to making Merlot in Washington, you see that we were sort of stamped. We were called out as a Merlot state. And people used to say I was a Merlot winemaker, but could I make Cabernet? It was kind of their thing. The wine grows very well in Washington. It's always been a pleasure making it. As I said, I've always been pro Merlot. I had never had any second thoughts about making it. I never liked Cabernet any more than I did Merlot as a grape. Later on, when we started seeing what Cab Franc could be, I have the same feeling about Cab Franc. These wines are enticing. They had their own parameters. It's not Cabernet. That's the good news, not the bad news. And they're accessible as well as having a certain amount of sophistication. Like anything else that becomes super popular, people want to dumb it down to make extra dollars for whatever reasons, and that happened with Merlot, and it eventually became kind of a punching bag. And it was very unfair. Same thing happened with Chenin Blanc in a much worse way. It's practically driven out of the wine vocabulary, but it's a terrific grape. And a few people I know in California are making it now and doing a really good job. And it deserves much more audience than it gets. So that's my take on Merlot. This is a 2018 vintage. It's from a Shampoo vineyard, so those things come into play. You start to see what the vintage is like here, even though these wines haven't been bottled very long. You start to see what the wine's like after it's been open 3 hours. And I think that if you're gonna try this wine, give yourself a break and do it that way. It's just not enough showing compared to what we'll be showing when you try it in the first 15 minutes, which we did anyway.
We did.
Because we're professionals. That's right. We want to know everything about it.
We might even have to try them again in another
3
hours.
We might even have to try it again in 3 more hours. So anyway, they're satisfying wines. It's an interesting vintage. The wine has medium bodied, good depth, really nice balance to it. Some tannin to kind of set up the rest of the wine. And the aromatics are coming along. I think they'll be more pronounced as time goes on.
Yeah, I get a lot of kind of that like dark cherry, little bit of red kind of raspberry. It actually started off when we opened it, I think a little bit more bright red fruit for me, but as it aired a lot, it's kind of deepened. It seems to have gotten even a little bit more pronounced and rich, which is
that's
really
good finish.
Yeah,
I mean,
really clean finish. Yeah, I mean, this is, once again, I mentioned it in our last video, this to me is classic Washington Merlot. Like I said, this is an example of what Merlot should be, not an example of probably what most people think of it. Yeah, we're excited about the 2018s. We tend to release our single varietals earlier than the blends. So like I said, you'll see all of the 18s probably over the next year or so. But if everything is going to be in the same vein of this 18 Merlot, then we should be looking pretty good for all the wines coming up. But that being said, I'm still really excited about the 17s that we're currently selling, especially with emphasis on the 2017 Two Blondes Cab Franc, which we're not trying tonight, but I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Going forward, so our next flight after this, we're going to do a Two Blondes mini vertical. We have 2014, 15, and 16, which during our last tasting was really interesting because there's just such a bigger difference in the wines from each vintage that we're not expecting to see. I think we get so used to drinking the most current wines, whether it's the wines in barrel or the wines we just bottled, that you kind of forget about all these wines that are now actually 2014, 6 years old. And being able to revisit them all side by side has actually been a really interesting exercise. So this is still actually smelling a lot like it was when it came out. You mentioned a little bit of reduction earlier on, but I think that seems to have blown off at this point for me. I think the fruit seems.
Yeah, I think that has it, but it still kind of seems like it was. It's the middle is a little bit more supple. The wine's a little bit more liquid. A little bit more supple, I guess, is the best word for it, and showing a little bit better. But it seems like it's in maybe in a kind of a stage where maybe you kind of want to hang on to it a couple of years. I like it just fine. It seems a bit different from what it was for me a couple of years ago. And, you know, I'm not surprised that it would sort of semi-shut down. It's a few years old now. It's been in bottle, 4 years? It's about 76% Merlot and Cab Franc. So a lot of that is kind of all melded in.
Yeah, and I think it's showing the vintage, which would be 2014. A warm vintage, but relatively even, all things considered, especially when we talk about 15. So it's one of those wines that right out of the gate is very approachable. I think it's a wine that's going to kind of move around over the next couple of years, but it definitely has the capabilities to age really well. I mean, you're already seeing a lot of those kind of secondary and even tertiary characteristics come out in the wine. Like I said, as more it sits there in glass longer, it just gets more pronounced. So
it's a well knit one, but there's just something about it that makes me want to just wait a bit on it. I don't know what it is. This is the 15 two blondes. As you probably, you know, maybe don't even want to hear about it, but it was a very warm year. It was the hottest year on record in terms of growing grapes. We had a lot of thoughts about that. I remember being out there and walking through the vineyard. It was all perfectly green. Everything looked great. It had just been about 115 degrees or 111 degrees for 10 days. And that was the ambient temperature. So you're wondering what's going on, but you didn't know that. You'd think you were like, it was like 80 degrees because everything was growing so well. And as it progressed along, you know, you start to get expectations. But by that time, I'd been making wine long enough where, you know, I wanted to see what's going to happen later. I wasn't worried about it. But I was curious about what's it going to be like. And it was surprising. The fruit kept coming in. We kept picking around. We were looking at the acids primarily. And they were hanging in there really well all the way through, from the beginning to the end. And I just started noting it. And it was surprising. And the alcohols weren't very high either. So you try to make sense of that. The only thing we could think of was that the heat had actually pushed the plants back from continued ripening, and then picked it up later on when it cooled off. And so that the heat was just sort of a cold storage for them for 10 days or something. It just sort of stopped the ripening process. But they never were explosion. There wasn't much of an explosion in the way the sugars jumped up. And
yeah, you didn't get these.
Even in the beginning and even to the end, the acid was like about 3.5 pH, which is sort of normal for the grapes coming in.
Yeah, and now you're seeing with some age too that you didn't get any of that kind of heaviness or jamminess or cloyiness that comes with wines that sometimes where you can see there's that kind of alcohol might jump up. You're also seeing, like I said, a really bright acid. I think that's one of the things that still stands out to me is how kind of fresh and bright the wines are from, like I said, what is always going to be considered a hot vintage. So it's, like I said, it's exciting to see. I think this is one of those things that's one of the more fun things about wine and aging wines is getting to see that change in those wines, which when you maybe try out of the barrel for us, or when we write bottle or when you buy them brand new, you know, you have certain opinions about them, and then those can drastically change over even just a couple of years not trying them.
Well, I'm glad you used that word fresh, because it's something that I would constantly hear winemakers in Europe, people selling wine in Europe, especially on the continent, when they talk about the wine, they'd say how fresh it was, or this wine seemed very fresh to me. We almost hear the opposite here. Wines are supposed to be decadent. Wines are supposed to be like ripened something or other, cheese or something, I don't know what, aged meat or something. But it's the freshness of the wine that was always at the forefront of the European winemakers and people that were selling wine. And it's something that I'd like to see, you know, I'd like to see more in our wines. I think we have it in these, and I wish it was more considered to be more of a virtue in this country, rather than the opposite being true, where they want to see things just so liqueur-like. It's a sort of almost, you know, they want it to be port-like, but no, not port. It's still wine somehow. And in fact, the matter is that when you reach those kind of levels of maturity that they need in order to produce that kind of wine, you have a sweetness in there that's irreversible and can hardly be balanced no matter what you do. It's a sucrosity, as my friend William called it, and that comes from alcohol. So many critics I heard talking about the wine and saying, if I was saying, well, I don't like this wine, it's sweet, and they say, oh, but there's no residual sugar. And they're absolutely correct. But what they don't account for is the sweetness of the alcohol, and alcohol is sweet. So, you know, we're not shy about picking our fruit when it's ripe, but when we're balanced, we don't get that kind of what for me is a cloying and kind of it's a pretty serious flaw for me. I remember giving my daughter some wine from probably the preeminent Chardonnay maker in California when she was about 18. She was here at a party with some of her friends, and they also had some white Burgundy. And I asked them later on, I gave it to them on purpose to see what they'd like, because I was sure they'd like the Chardonnay because it was so old Blanc. No, they didn't. They liked the Bourgogne Blanc. That's something that was telling to me that, you know, when you have these sort of naive palates, even then, just tasting things without knowing anything about, you know, anything, knowing licorice from, you know, lemon, you could still have these preferences that show that fresh wines are actually more interesting to people. So that being said, I'm done. It's all yours from now on, Willie.
Yeah, no.
Here's 2016.
So we're on to the 16-2 Blondes. Wine that some of you probably picked up possibly last year and hopefully this year before this event. But actually still
just they all have such good noses, all the 16.
I mean, I agree. And we open these early, and when I'm smelling, I mean, it just comes out right away.
And they've been like that, but you know.
Yeah, 16 was one of those vintages. I think it reminded me more of 14 if I had to place it. It's definitely different. I mean, trying these wines side by side, I don't even know. I mean, they taste so different. But as far as that approachability for a wine that's, you know, still relatively young for us, very approachable, you know, while still maintaining like a seriousness. I mean, a structure to it that's, like I said, you can see this wine's going to age, but like we were talking about earlier, it's got a different mid palate or body, as most people would refer to it. It doesn't have the same, maybe kind of, I want to say it's a different type of structure than 15. It's a broader, is the way we talked about it earlier, which makes sense. This wine's just got a lot of interesting depth. And as I mentioned earlier to my dad, it's a different finish too. I think that's the one thing about this wine that stood out to me too, is that the finish on the 16 has a more whetstone, slatey kind of thing that I didn't get in the other two wines. Obviously, they're all the same vineyard and relatively similar makeup. So to see those kind of unique differences show up in each vintage was really interesting. And like I said, one of the fun parts about making the blends when we do, and then being able to try them again later. That's part of the process that I think I've learned maybe the most of, honestly, since starting here. Is coming up with a blend is an important part, because that's what makes each wine.
Uh-oh. I gotta get rid of the dogs.
We have a couple of dogs walking around cords that are precarious. So
come on, Chester, let's go. Come on.
Hold tight, everyone.
Go ahead. Come on, man. Come on.
But yeah, no, this has been my dad was really interested before we even came up with this event to talk to people through some kind of video about the 2014, 15, and 16 two blondes. Because it's a vineyard that we actually own. I think there's just something about it that is special. And he always seems to have an extra interest, I think, in revisiting these wines. They're, like I said, Two Blondes is a unique site within the Yakima Valley, and has a really unique personality that I think distinguishes it from the rest of the wines that we make. Like I said, not necessarily better or worse, it's different. It's like there's a certain herbal floralness to it in the nose, especially too, that can be more pronounced young, and then tends to kind of fade away and then come back out when it's aged. Yeah, exciting. I mean, Two Blondes Vineyard, like I said, is one of those vineyards that, like I said, it's younger in comparison to a lot of the more famous vineyards you probably hear about from Washington. But, at this point, these wines are being made from vines that are now 14 to 16, 17 years old. I mean, you're really starting to see the wines, I think, start to evolve and fill out more too. The wines have always been really interesting, even from the early 2000s. But there was a point at which I think the vine age really started to show, and you started to see the kind of depth and complexity come out to really make a really, truly complete wine. So we're excited to see how these continue to go vintage to vintage. Based on the 17 single varietals, like I said, some of you have already tried. I'm pretty excited to actually go back now and revisit the 17 Two Blondes blend. But yeah, no, it's like I said, it's always a great chance if you have the opportunity to try the same wine from different vintages, because I think that's something that not necessarily everyone promotes maybe as much as we do. I think it's something that we actually take pride in, is being able to talk about the differences in vintages in Washington that you can see in our wines. We're not trying to hide the fact that it's going to taste different for better or for worse. Each vintage presents its own unique challenges, and you can see that in the wines, whether it's a hot vintage or a cool vintage. And it's, I think, a unique trait of Andrew Will to be able to, craft a wine that has a certain level of consistency and quality and style, but still truly shows the differences between vintages. And that's what really makes the wines interesting at the end of the day, on top of being just enjoyable to drink. Because of that, we're actually going to try the rest of the wine. So we have the Ciel du Cheval, the Shampoo, and the Sorella side by side, 15 and 16, to kind of get a better idea of, one, the vintages, and two, just the wine, because each vintage, while it has a similar makeup and blend, it does tend to vary a little bit, and that can also play a factor. So next up, let's try the two Ciels. 16. So 2015 Ciel du Cheval, 63% Merlot, 37% Cabernet Franc. That's actually kind of a change. When you started making this blend, it wasn't always necessarily just a Merlot Cabernet blend.
No, because we made Cabernet Sauvignon, and it could be a third of the wine. But I think starting in 2012 maybe, or 11, I can't remember, I was thinking about the wines, and I just started trying them for a couple of years without the Cabernet in them, and I like them actually better without the Cabernet in them. I don't just disparage the ones that I made before with Cabernet. In fact, early on we made CL Cabernet Sauvignon and bottled it that way, but stylistically we decided we would just go with those two grapes, and so that's what these are. They're roughly 40-60 maybe, with Merlot being the having the most in each blend. They were surprising to us when we first opened them. Somehow CL had sort of gotten side shifted, I think, in my thinking in the last few years. It used to be my favorite wine. I mean, for a tin, from 1989. In fact, I still have 2 bottles of the 89 CL Merlot, which last time I tried them, they were good. I don't know. I'll have to try them again someday. Like, that may be about it for them. I don't know. So, but so from 89 up, to 2000, I mean, at least 10 years, that was my favorite wine. Favorite vineyard.
Yeah,
I don't know. You switch around.
Yeah, I think that's part of it with making different wines from different vineyards. Is I feel like people always ask, "What's your favorite wine?" And it really, truly does vary. Some years I feel like the fruit coming from Shampoo is just top notch, and then some years that, like I said, in 15, the CL really seems to shine.
I grabbed the wrong one first. Oh wait,
let's put the pork in it. So yeah, it can definitely vary. CL is a unique vineyard just because, like I say, it comes from Red Mountain, which is typically known as a very warm to hot growing site. And what you get is these kind of structured, almost austere types of styles of wines that typically tend to be a little bit more closed upon bottling and right after. But once you get a little bit of bottle age on them and open them up, all that fruit comes out, they start to really shine, and it's a really fun wine in that way. Is that I think it really has almost the biggest shift and change from the time we bottle it to the time people tend to start buying and opening them.
It's probably the wine you'd want to keep the longest if you were going to keep wines. Although you can enjoy them right away. They have more tannin. They will always have. They had more tannin from 30 years ago, and they have more tannin now. That's characteristic of the vineyard. But it isn't too much tannin. It's just the quality of the wine that comes through. I think there's been so much talk about tannins in this country, and especially with American wines, that people have forgotten that it is part and parcel, a part of the wine. And you can have a wine that's tannic. I mean, I can't tell you how many wines when we, from Italy, from Barolo and Barbaresco, we try it, especially when they're young, and say, wow, this wine's really tannic, but I really like it. Now it's kind of like, well, this one's really tannic, so it can't be good. And that's, I don't think, the case. Do you think that's the way people talk still?
Kind of. I think, unfortunately, because wine can be such a vast topic, there tends to be some kind of dumbing down and broad stroke talk about varietals and the terms that are associated with wines, like I said, tannins, even acid, different flavors and stuff, finish. And like I said, tannins, wine are just so varied. And they change too. And something like CL, for me, I always get more of a dustiness. They're definitely more apparent. And a great example, actually, as we'll see next, is the difference in tannin structure from Shampoo to CL, because both are heavy Merlot, so you can't really say that, one's got a bunch of Cabernet, that's why it seems more tannic to me. They're both, around 50% Merlot, but like I said, the finish and the tannin structure, just completely night and day different to me. And that's, once again, one of those things that you have to try the wines to understand that too. It's hard to be able to truly describe that kind of sensation you get when you're drinking wine, that structure. And like I said, it works in different wines too. I think, once again, tannins are one of those things, like acid and all things, that as long as it's in balance, and it's paired with the right type of weight in the wine, and even probably the right type of food, can make a big difference. So seeing, once again, something simple that, this is going to be better because it's going to age way better. It's going to be better because it's so tannic and big versus a wine that has no tannins. You know, like I said, it's a statement that's just not going to hold true for really the majority of wines out there.
I mean, the wines that have aged quite a long time, you know, like say from 95, the vintage from 95, the couple of Merlots, I mean, they used to put this little R on it. Sometimes when I'd select out barrels that I liked more than other barrels. Those wines and just the regular Merlot both drink really well right now. And most of that wine, especially in the R, maybe all of it is from CL. And they don't seem tannic at all. There isn't even a question of it.
Yeah.
For some reason, it seems to move itself off the table when the wines have gotten that old.
No, I mean, actually drinking the 1602, I think the Cab Franc actually tends to stand out more apparent in the 16 than the 15. There is a little bit more, but for whatever reason, there's more of that kind of herbal, like I said, kind of a whetstone thing that stands out more apparent, especially in kind of the back end of the finish. And that's another reason I think why not having Cabernet tends to make this wine almost more complete. I think you get more of the Merlot and Cab Franc to kind of shine without Cabernet. Like I said, it's not because the Cabernet is not good. It just happens. I think that Merlot and Cab Franc shine brighter without it in the blend. And that's one of the reasons. Those are the things we look at. And it doesn't mean that forever that CL will necessarily be Merlot and Cab Franc only. That can always change. And that's part of the beauty of being able to do your own blending from each vineyard and not have a set formula that you have to use. We really get to make blends based on things like the vintage, based on how individual grape varietals were grown, individual rows were grown, and how they're tasting. In cool years, it's going to be a lot tougher to ripen Cabernet Sauvignon. So there's a good chance you're going to be using a lot more Merlot since it tends to ripen for us.
Also, it will ripen it too.
It will ripen it too. No, I can think of the word ripen. Ripening is a big part of that too. I mean, Merlot ripens for us almost a full month earlier sometimes than the Cabernets, depending on site. But yeah, no, these wines are, like I said, it's exciting to be able to go back and try some of these wines because, like my dad said, we make 4 blends, multiple vintages. You're constantly focusing kind of on the newer ones, or you're focusing on the older ones, which are the ones you're possibly selling, and it feels like you kind of forget to try the wines in between. So it's been a cool experience going back and trying all of these wines. We're going to move on now. So we got the shampoos up next. And if anyone out there wants us to go back and revisit a wine they missed or talk about something that they didn't hear, please let us know. Like I said, there's no real structure to this whole Zoom session. We're really just wanting to try these wines, and hopefully things we say resonate with some of you. As winemakers, obviously there's a strong intellectual side to doing it, but at the same time, it also still is just enjoyable for us to be able to go through and talk about the things we saw originally and might have changed, or the things we saw early on and haven't changed. For me, especially, I think doing more and more of this part of the experience of wine. Like I said, we talk about, I know I can go on and a wine dinner about, the majesticness of a vineyard and the type of oak regimen we do. But at the end of the day, part of it is trying the wines and being able to talk about them. And that's, for me, actually been probably the best part of today, is just thinking and talking about the wines and how they change and trying them multiple times. Shampoo. So this is obviously one of the more well-known vineyards, I'd say, in the state as of now. For sure, is definitely a well-known AVA, but I think Shampoo Vineyard really even is up there as far as recognition as a vineyard along with the AVA.
This wine tastes way better to me now than it did 3 hours ago. Way better. In fact, it was the wine that I wondered about the most of all of these wines when we opened it. What was going on with it? But right now, I can. It's pretty much where I thought it might have been when we first opened it. the way I remembered it. It definitely got a really cool structure to it. It isn't so much about the depth of it immediately, but it's a thick and sort of broad kind of a palate. I like the nose and the varieties that are involved here. Merlot and what 70-80% Merlot and Cap Franc show through.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, and I've always appreciated making 2 wines from Shampoo Vineyard because, well, obviously, I think the Sorella is what most people are familiar with from that vineyard, which is typically heavy Cabernet. And for reason, because most of the vineyard is planted in Cabernet Sauvignon. We do obviously grow Merlot and Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, and at one point, what's the...
Malbec.
Yeah, Malbec. I mean, there is also some other unique varietals that I don't think you'll see much out there. I don't know if the Marquette's there anymore.
Yeah.
And the Lemberger. I think the Lemberger's gone. And that was, I think Paul wanted to try different things back when he was still managing the vineyard. It's a vineyard that now is probably one of the older ones in Washington. Some of the Cabernet there was planted back in the 70s. And even the Merlot was probably planted in...
That was planted later.
Yeah.
I can't remember when it was planted. 98? I don't know.
Which, when you think of the history of Washington wine, is actually still relatively... I guess in this case, it's actually starting to get older. We're excited, too, because we actually have now planted some new acreage of Merlot in Shampoo on some previously old vines we took out, and we're pretty excited to be able to see how that will come up. Because one thing I think that we do at Andrew Will, that you're starting to see much more of, but I think since we've planted 2 blondes, was experimenting and trying different clonal selection for Bordeaux varietals. I know you are definitely a fan of the French clones that we planted at 2
They're better,
blondes.
there's no question. You don't even have to be a winemaker. You never even have to have opened a bottle of wine in your life. You can walk through the vineyard right now at 2 blondes and taste those grapes and taste what's called the Washington clone, which is what the 95% of it, maybe more of the state is planted in. They're interesting. They taste better. They're just as grapes. And it's clear every year to us. I mean, it's sort of, it's just, I think we mentioned it. Wow, these really, taste like something. And they make a better wine. What's been really cool about it is somebody, when I was talking about this years ago and talking about my desire to see this succeed and how well I thought it had gone so well. We sure it grows well in California, and you've been to these different wineries and you've tasted 3 or 4 different wineries with these clones and they're better, but who knows if that's going to work in Washington. They grow better in Washington. They grow better than the Washington Merlot. They grow, if you want more grapes, they grow more. And if you want higher quality grapes, they grow higher quality grapes. Just as plants, they're vibrant. And they're easier to handle with our climate than the other ones. So they're ideal for here. And they're, what do we use, 181 and 348?
For Merlot, yeah.
And those are 2 clones that initially came to this country in, I believe, 1999. First I only had a half acre of them, so I didn't have enough money to buy it, but now we have 4 acres of it that we use, and then the other Merlot we use in for other things. But for the 2 blondes blend, we're using those varieties. It's been interesting, and it's been it's pretty gratifying to see it work out, because we start doing these things. I don't know. I didn't go to school studying any of that stuff. I don't have any enologic. I have any viticultural experience other than my own. I don't understand structures of the way plants grow in a chemical, biological sense, as well as maybe I should.
All right, we're going to move on. So we have the 2016 Shampoo blend. The only real differences on the sheet here between these two is that there's a little bit more, there's definitely more Cabernet Sauvignon, the Cab Franc, and there's no Petit Verdot, which we actually added 5% in the 2015. That being said, they're actually both almost exactly 50% Merlot, which is typically, I would say, pretty standard in this wine. I know we've had a couple of vintages where the Cab Franc actually, I think, was probably the leading grape. But I would say typically,
yeah, I think some of them have been like 50-60% Cab Franc.
Yeah.
Now, again, this has just got that nice middle to it, interesting fruit. It's attractive wine right away. I mean, it just kind of, tastes good. I can only look forward to this wine getting better in bottle. It just seems like it's got it. And it's just, resurrecting itself. It's just good wine, from my viewpoint. I don't know. Not to compare it to anything or even know much about it. It just tastes pretty good. And
that's what we're looking for. Pretty good. No, I mean, at the end of the day, like I was saying earlier, we want wines to taste good. We want to be able to drink them. I think that was one thing that my dad here always was important to him, is making wines that he wanted to drink at the end of the day. Wine trends come and go. I mean, we've seen already in just the last few years a big swing from, the typically 100% oaked, very ripe wine to now more, I guess the word would be minimal intervention, borderline natural kind of movement coming through. So you're seeing this kind of swing, and it'll swing back again, I'm sure, someday. But at the end of the day, as a small boutique winery, you want to make wines that you like to drink, and at some point hope to just find a clientele that enjoy that same type of wine as you. I think it helps making wines that are, I think pretty broad for people. I mean, these are definitely full-bodied fruit driven, especially young wines that I think for the person who only drinks bigger Cabernets would definitely enjoy. But they have an elegantness to them and a freshness to them that for someone who, likes to drink French wine or European wine would also enjoy. And I think that's something about the style of wine we make that's definitely unique and special. Is that, like I said, we have a very wide audience from, like I said, the song community to small retailers to, people around the world, which has been really exciting to see, especially in the last few years, our presence grow. Like I said, not just on the coasts, but, in the Midwest and the South, and even more recently throughout the EU and more in South Korea. So, like I said, we hope for that to keep going and expand. Like I said, I think American wine still has a long ways to go to prove itself in kind of the international stage. I think most of the focus for a lot of American winemakers is the domestic market, but you're starting to see a little bit more of a push since we now, I think, have the quality and style of wine to, get it into new markets where people are already very familiar with wine in the regions, but are also looking to try, like I said, different new world regions. So that's an exciting part about, making wines of these caliber. Yeah, both these shampoos have gotten better. I mean, some of the other wines, they've definitely changed.
I'd say the 15 changed the most.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but whatever.
All right.
Try the 15 one more time.
That's yeah, someone in the previous session was talking about I think they're from Chicago. One person was from Chicago, one was from Florida. And they were talking about wines in their market. And one of them was just mentioning how, you can find some Washington wines at Andrew Will and some of the bigger retail chains, but at small boutique retail shops, it's pretty limited selection. And as someone who travels quite a bit now around the country to wine shops showing our wines off, yeah, I mean, he's spot on. It's very limited finding, kind of the more high quality boutique style wineries outside of Washington State. A lot of Washington winemakers are on the small side, and a lot of it is sold directly to consumer through tasting rooms. I think you're starting to see more Washington wineries focus on getting their wines outside of essentially the Northwest through distribution. Unfortunately, the distribution system set up is not conducive for small wineries, unfortunately, in America. It's can be a very confusing and hard system to navigate. Like I said, if you don't have the staff, the sales force to go out there and essentially do the groundwork to get it in front of people, in which case, like I said, unless you have a distributor that's, really on it and will get your wines in front of them, there's a reason why some of these small shops probably just don't ever see the wines in the first place. And part of it's consumer demand too. I mean, I go around and part of it's like the people who run the shops, people that work there, they have a couple clientele or customers that love Washington wine, and that's great. But when push comes to shove, they're trying to make money and stocking a whole shelf full of Washington for people that just don't even probably know that Washington makes wines can be hard. And we're hoping to change that. I mean, that's something that we both are always thinking about, is how can we change just the viewpoint, the education of Washington wine. And a lot of that just is, like I said, through talking at dinners, through talking at tastings and pourings, and continuing to kind of educate people and hopefully get our wines in front of them. I think at the end of the day, as we've seen, the only way you can really experience something, especially like wine, because it's so subjective, is to just try it. But it can be hard. I mean, as a small winery, we don't, like I said, have the manpower to get out there to every single city in front of every single restaurant and shop. But because, like I said, we rely on a strong network of distributors, a lot of them typically smaller, we still are able to get our wines in a lot of different places, which is exciting to see. There's just still a lot of progress to be made. As far as Washington wine as a region, I think that people actively seek out. We're still very far behind the name recognition of California AVAs such as Sonoma, Napa. People think of Washington, and I think they've heard of it. I think they know there's some good wines, but I think a lot of it's still pretty much limited to the big wineries, St. Michel, the Charles Smith wines. I think who else is that big that would get out, but those are really the only two I personally see consistently market to market. Like I said, it's trending upward, but I think it could move faster. I think, like I said, the quality's there. There's enough producers with enough wine to get it out there. It's just getting the people interested enough to go ask the restaurant or the retail shop in their neighborhood to buy the wine and show it. But like I said, we're getting there. It's just we rely on all of you guys to help spread that word. All right, and of course, last but not least, we have the Sorella blend, all from Shampoo Vineyard as well.
These wines look super good too, even when we first opened them.
So many of you are probably familiar with this wine. Obviously, as you can tell, the label is not the same as the rest of the line, but it is, yes, Andrew Will, and yes, probably our most popular wine. And not just because of scores and reviews. I mean, this wine is, like I said, being all from Shampoo now, from a really great mix of blocks of Cabernet, multiple blocks of Cabernet that we grow out there. Tends to create just a wine that always has just a sense of, like I said, a depth and complexity that, yeah, you see in all of our wines, but, this one continues to just get, I think, better and better with age as well. When people ask me which wines should I age the longest, we talk about CL because of the structure and just the wine it is. But Sorella is one of those wines that, especially, as it gets older, just gets better and better. My dad was able to do a really interesting vertical tasting in New York, last fall, or is it 2 falls ago now? It's hard to tell with everything going on, timelines anymore. But you tried 10 to 12 vintages going back to the mid-90s, and those were
98, I think.
98,
and maybe 97.
And how were those tasting?
Good. It was really interesting. Yeah, it's always interesting to get the wines out of the winery and out, into a different setting. A lot of wine writers and people, a few friends. It's interesting to try wines like that. You may think you know what you're talking about, even with your own wines, but it's always reinforcing, and I think a little bit eye-opening to do it every so often and see if what you think
Oh my God.
holds up.
I had Wendy. She was breathing too loudly for this conversation. Sorry, Wendy.
Who was?
Wendy, looks like she left. For those of you probably all have at least some point talked to Wendy, who's our essentially winery office manager.
Wendy was on there?
Yeah, Wendy was on there for a little bit.
She got too excited.
She got too excited. This is all
she
too
got
much
to the
for her.
Sorellas and she just like, she may have fainted.
So I should probably call her just to make sure she's all right.
Yeah.
How's that 16 Sorella?
Yeah, wow. Good.
Yeah, I mean, one thing about Shampoo Vineyard in general, and we saw it early on with the 2018s, is just, like I said, the kind of, for me, the depth of the fruit too. A lot darker, a lot deeper. Like I said, it's more blackberry, kind of boysenberry, rather than kind of the bright red cherry and raspberry I get with like two blondes, or even CL, which, like I said, both tend to be heavy in Merlot. But even then, like I said, there's definitely a difference, and we see it especially when it's in barrel. The difference in the Merlots from both two blondes, CL and Shampoo. Yeah, I mean, this is the Washington Cab. I mean, we classify it as a blend because we like the flexibility of not always having to be above that 75% threshold to call it Cabernet. But this is, for all intents and purposes, how I see it, Washington Cab, and a great example of it, of what we're doing really well up here. I wish people had the same interest in Merlot and Cab Franc, because I think what we're doing at those varietals is really exciting, and I think there's definitely a bigger market for those two varietals than there currently is. I see definitely with Cab Franc is one of those varietals that you see more and more people asking about it, more people very familiar with, especially 100% Cab Francs. They're probably also even familiar with, French Loire Valley Cab Francs. And it's exciting. I mean, I've now even started seeing articles written about California Cab Francs, which is always, I have to admit, a little bit irritating when you've been making Cab Francs at such a, I think, not value, but such an approachable price point. And then you see someone in Napa create a $95 Cab Franc, and all of a sudden they're the most unique person down there because they're making Cab Franc.
You discovered it.
It's all of a sudden so big down there, but there's all these Cab Francs that you're seeing coming out of Washington for the last, half decade at this point that just never really got the recognition. But they're super interesting.
But it is a lot of people around the country. When I haven't traveling as much as I used to, but I was surprised how much, when I was standing there pouring wine for people, how much interest there was in Cab Franc. And I think it's a genuine interest. People simply, I don't know, I think it's just a good, nice change up from what they're used to drinking. And they've accepted it as being something that they like. There's some people, though, that they simply do not like the herbal, sort of kitchen herbal qualities that are apparent, especially in the two blondes, but in the Shampoo and CL too. And so they just shouldn't drink it. But that's the charm of the wine. That's the kind of the great thing about the wine, is the way it's able to carry those aromas and through to people, and the way it's interwoven with the fruit and the other sort of earth qualities in the Cab Franc. It makes it different. It's different. It's more different from, Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon in my mind are more like each other than Cab Franc is like either one. So it's been great. The first stuff we made was in '96. Jim Holmes had planted some at Ciel du Cheval, and I can just remember making the wine, and even before it had gone through ML, I mean, I was fascinated. I couldn't believe how interesting it was and how great it was when I put it with some of it with Merlot, or I put some of it in Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's great as a wine that you can use to make Merlot shine brighter, and Cabernet Sauvignon do the same thing, but it can also stand on its own. Somebody back then, when I asked them to plant it in their vineyard, told me it was a blending grape, and that was the end for me with them. It took me a while, but that was it. It's a blending grape. Cheval Blanc is made almost all Cab Franc, so I guess they're a blending. They're sort of a blended chateau or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nothing like that, anyways. Yeah, and it's a great. I mean, like my dad touched on earlier, it's a great food wine because of those kind of herbal characteristics. And that's something I always like to touch on about with these wines too, is while they're very approachable and very drinkable by themselves, they're very enjoyable with food, probably even better. I mean, these are the type of wines, and that's one reason why I think we have such a great following, is that versatility, and why we have a really, really strong support from the sommelier community around the country. We personally even have a focus on making sure our wines are, poured on premise, by the bottle, by the glass. And it's exciting to see because, like I said, I think it's one thing to make a wine that's bursting full of flavor and it's rich and it's got alcohol and tannins and but it's super smooth and it's all these things. But when you drink it with food, it just falls apart. We all want to claim that, our wines are all food friendly and everything, but I just don't necessarily agree with that. I think there's a lot of wine terms, unfortunately, that get tossed out.
Well, they're not. It's just weird. There's some wines that I could name right now. You can open them up and put them in tastings, and they do this or they do that in the tasting, and the critic said this and that. But try it with a piece of meat or something, and it's just weird. They just don't go. There's just not a whole. They get the alcohol, or possibly just I think it's that. It doesn't work.
Yeah, too much.
People, if you have a table, a bunch of wines on, you could try. You'll see people, unless they're just interested to try more because they've heard about it, they won't drink it with food.
Yeah. So I think that's an important part of, like I said, the style of wine that we make is that ability to pair well with food. And you see that, like I said, I think for a small winery that, obviously all the way out here on Vashon Island, we have a presence, like I said, both here and around the country. Our distributor in New York, Bowler Wines, has done a really great job of getting our wines in front of some of what we think the top restaurants in New York, and to see them embrace the wines and in some cases pour the wines by the glass. I think last time we checked, Danielle, in New York City, was pouring the Cabernet and the Cab Franc.
They were pouring the two blondes.
And the two blondes.
They were blind. The 2014 two blondes.
Yeah, by the glass, which I think on their menu typically is only a 5 or 6 glass pour menu. So we're talking one of the best restaurants in New York and probably in the country, obviously choosing to pour our wines. And like I said, I think what Dan mentioned a little earlier, these are people with very discerning tastes and palates for things. And in fact, they saw our wines being that versatile pair with, food and for people. Is really exciting. I think, like I said, it's great to be able to have a broad appeal, and like I said, and be able to enjoy wines with food or by themselves. I
think wine primarily, in the home of where it pretty much started in Europe, was always on the table.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's part of food. It isn't, I've never lived there for an extended period of time, so I don't know how much people drink wine outside of the table, but it's part and parcel, part of eating.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think wine doesn't have to be put on these kind of pedestals, and that's why the scoring system, while benefiting us, and especially as far as marketing and getting our name out there, tends to overlook just the idea of wine and enjoying wine and drinking wine. And that's part of the reason why we actually, came up with for many of you, I'm sure are familiar, the involuntary commitment wine label, because we were looking to create wines with an emphasis on dining. We wanted a wine that was going to drink well, relatively young, was going to be approachable, and pair well with food, kind of a wide range of food. And I think so far we've accomplished that. We're pretty excited about the 2019, which we just bottled back in August. Tends to be skewed, once, as we mentioned, heavy in Cab Franc, because once again, it tends to be a very versatile grape, I think, for foods as far as red wine.
We wanted, when I traveled, I was just stunned by the number of restaurants, young chefs starting up, a lot of people coming in there. They had good prices for their food, and their wine list went from $40 to $80, $90. Well, none of our wines are going to fit in there. So we designed this wine, Involuntary Commitment, for those kinds of wine lists and others. Sometimes it's taken advantage of in the wine, where they're buying it, they're marking it up way too much. But, that being what it is, it's not a second or third label or anything like that. It's a wine we designed for a certain purpose, just like the black labels. They're designed because we're making varietals. And we want to show varietals as something in our blends or something. And this Involuntary Commitment is another kind of wine that we designed. Recently, a wine writer who I'll probably write to and let him know how we came about making the wine, let him know that it is not in our minds that it is second to anything. It's simply a wine that's designed a certain way. We crop a certain way, we make it a certain way, in order for us to keep the prices in line with what we have to in order to get in front of people. It's important for me. It's important for us that people drink our wine. It's nice when you're selling expensive wine, and it's nice when you're, think that you're a great winemaker, or there's all these other things that go along with this restaurant has it, and they're the most popular restaurant in the world, blah, blah, blah. But we want our wines in front of people. We want them to be drunk as wine, as a daily occurrence, as something that's hopefully memorable, or simply just something that's your favorite and it's just what you order. That's what Involuntary Commitment's about, and actually the whole structure of Andrew Will. It's interesting. We buy lots of wines that are very expensive and try them, and it's fun and all of that. But when push comes to shove, I hope somebody's actually drinking wines. There's so many wines that I see that are not on restaurant lists ever, anywhere, that are so popular in the press. I guess they're in people's cellars. I don't know.
Well, anyways, that concludes all the wines we're going to try today. Like I said, we might sit here for a couple more minutes and revisit.
Did Wendy recover Chief Hank?
Yeah, she might have. Like I said, don't worry. We all
make sure. We don't know where Wendy is.
Make sure Wendy's all right before we leave here today. We just want to thank everyone for obviously tuning in and listening to us. I will post the previous session as well as this one on our YouTube channel, which I believe is just under Andrew Will Winery. We also have some other videos that we edit onto that kind of showcase the vineyards and us talking more about wine. So you feel free to revisit these anytime you want or share them, skip through the parts that you don't want to hear. But no, we're excited. We're hopefully in the future going to start producing more of these kind of clips for people to view. I think obviously with everything going on, it's going to be a while before we have a bunch of you back in person here tasting with us. So until then, we hope to continue updating you on what we're doing. I guess on a final note, everything from 19 is coming in already and looking pretty
20.
Solid. 20, shoot, yeah, 20. Almost the end of 20. It was looking really good. I went up this afternoon and our Semillon's already fermenting. We also have some Ciel du Cheval Merlot in tank, which will probably get going anytime in the next couple of days. but I think we're hopefully going to dodge a bullet that most of the smoke is blowing over these grapes that are already pretty ripe. We had some experience with this in 2017 and a little bit in 18 with fires and smoke. And I've yet to see any issues with any of our wines from those vintages. I don't expect to see anything as of now in 20. But like I said, it's early in the vintage, so we shall see. But as of now, we are all, for the most part, ready to go and getting another vintage under our belts, even considering the consistent smoke in the air, which is keeping us inside for the most part. That being said, once again, thanks for listening. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to let us know now or send us an email or write something in the comments. But like I said, hope you had a good time. And like I said, hopefully we'll see you guys next year at the open house in person. All right. Bye. All right. We did it.
Yeah, the wines look good though, huh? It'd be interesting if, no, we only didn't have very many people, to see if any of them, if they don't already have these wines.